Good evening, everybody. We may soon have new and explosive insight into what is the greatest political scandal in American history: the radical Dems and the deep state's efforts to overthrow President Trump. Hundreds of pages of depositions, transcripts, and FBI evaluations expected to soon be released to the public on Obamagate. The White House document release will follow on the reporting of Just the News editor-in-chief John Solomon, who here last night reported on the upcoming release. We'll be talking with John Solomon about what we can expect and what he knows here next. The documents to be released, declassified by President Trump. And among the bombshell revelations, an admission by former MI6 agent Christopher Steele, the author of the fraudulent Trump dossier, that he leaked information to the U.S. media from his dirty Trump dossier in an effort to distract from Hillary Clinton's ongoing email scandal and the reopening of the FBI investigation into that scandal. That admission, made in the fall of 2017, the documents promise to further expose the radical left and the deep state's plot, hatched by none other than Hillary Clinton, then candidate Donald Trump's opponent, to overthrow the Trump presidency later on. A plot that has been underway since the summer of 2016. In fact, on June 13th, 2016, President Obama's former campaign manager laid it all out for everyone to see. David Plouffe tweeted this, quote, "It is not enough to simply beat Trump. He must be destroyed thoroughly. His kind must not rise again." That tweet coming just weeks before James Comey initially closed the FBI's investigation of Hillary Clinton's email server scandal. Just before. And it was that same summer in which the Clinton campaign constructed the plot to distract from her scandal by ginning up the false Russia collusion fraud against then-candidate Trump. And Plouffe's tweet also, curiously preceded by only a month and a half, the FBI's first effort to frame General Michael Flynn. President Trump's declassification order threatens to expose any and all members of the deep state swamp, the radical Dems who have feverishly worked to undermine, to overthrow his presidency, and to block his agenda. Today, one of the gatekeepers of the swamp, none other than Senator Lindsey Graham, undercut the president once again. Graham's Senate Judiciary Committee released the transcripts of 11 interviews that Graham had kept hidden and unavailable from officials involved in investigating the origins of Obamagate. They include interviews from the likes of former DOJ officials Bruce Orr, Dana Boente. All of the interviews released were conducted before the November 3rd election, and Senator Graham sat on every single one of them. Senator Graham also continues, to disappoint the American people, to say the least, to deny their right to know. And he had this brazen remark about his document dump today. "We have released as much material as possible, but some classified material has still been withheld." This, ladies and gentlemen, is one sorry excuse for a senator. Joining us tonight is John Solomon, editor-in-chief of Just the News, best-selling author, great American. And John, let's start with this document dump from Senator Graham, since it is the most immediate development. 11 interviews that he sat on. This man is
back to March of last year
and appalling.
March of last year. Yeah, it's remarkable. I think Senator Graham was just simply trying to crash President Trump's last declassification party. There's some interesting stuff in there, things that would have been nice to know before the election. I'll give you a good example. Steve Laycock, the executive assistant director of the FBI, says that everybody knew inside the FBI and the State Department that Christopher Steele was so bad that he actually thought the U.S. government had a consulate in Miami when none was existent. This is a guy we're trusting to give us intelligence, and he doesn't even know the Russians can't be doing what he claims because there is no consulate in Miami. Laycock testifies to the committee. Everybody was talking about it. We knew about that. And yet, while they knew he was that bad off, that Christopher Steele was that bad off, they were representing to the FISA court that he was a solid guy, no derogatory information. Those sort of revelations would have been nice last summer, last fall, not 4 days or 5 days before Joe Biden takes office.
There are so many revelations that we have received, including the fact that Hillary Clinton authored the plot to distract from her own scandal, the email scandal, and to have official Washington, our government, participate in a plot to block the candidacy of Donald Trump and to overthrow his presidency. What is stunning to me, John, is with that knowledge, and it's separate from this, in part, it's separate from this release of documents we're expecting from the White House. We know this. And the radical Dems, Nancy Pelosi, proceed with this impeachment fraud once again against the president. The national left-wing media is so intertwined, so complicit with the Democratic Party and the deep state that they're not even acknowledging. The American people, many of the, if not most Americans, don't realize the hoax that's been perpetrated on them. And that is this plot hatched by Hillary Clinton and the Dems to destroy Donald Trump. David Plouffe wasn't kidding when he said what he did.
No, he wasn't kidding. You know, the great thing about David Plouffe, he tells you exactly what he's going to do. And the Republicans have been asleep at the switch for 4 years as he's told the American public what he planned to do. The reason why the media, the mainstream media, is silent is that they were primary co-conspirators in the creation, dissemination, and sustaining of a false narrative for 2 and 3 years. And to this day, by not acknowledging their failures, by not covering the reversal of the story with the same aggressiveness that they first put it on the front pages, they have disturbed the American public. And that's why in the Gallup poll that came out right after Christmas, American news media are held at the lowest esteem in American history. And 30% of Americans, a third of America, don't believe a single word that comes from the news media. They have made their own bed, just like Twitter and Facebook, who've lost $50 billion of video value in the last week. The American people are beginning to revolt against these institutions.
Well, they had better, because this government is as corrupt as I could possibly have ever imagined. Could you, in all seriousness, could you have ever possibly imagined that one political party, the Democrats, would be this corrupt, would seize control of a government as they attempt to overthrow a president with members of the deep state, as they have been doing since 2016?
If I was looking for a good movie, I'd hope that'd be the plot line. It'd be really interesting. The sad part is this is actually historically unfolded before our eyes. You have the alignment of news media bureaucrats in the Democratic Party carrying out a 4-year political dirty trick whose origins, or the origins of which, began with the desire to keep Hillary Clinton from having to answer to her email scandal. It is atrocious, and everybody knew it. President Obama knew it in July of 2016. The FBI knew about it in October of 16, and yet for 3 and 4 years, false stories from Adam Schiff down to the front page of the New York Times were force-fed to the American people. All of those institutions that have let us down deserve accountability, and Americans have that ability. They vote with their checkbook. They vote with their ballots. They have to take stake of what we're about to learn in the next 3 days. It's going to be an ugly story that we're going to be told.
And contemporaneously, corporate America is refusing to now donate money to the Republican Party because of the fiction ginned up by Pelosi and Schumer, and to a degree, the president-elect, that the president incited a mob and was responsible for the violence. Kevin McCarthy, the leader of the Republicans in the House, Mitch McConnell, the leader of the Republicans in the Senate, participating in this outrage against the President of the United States, while every one of these plots, every one of these malign actors over the course of 4 years is escaping media attention and consequence, either at the polls because not enough people even know what they've done, or because they are being blocked by big tech, social media. It's an outrage and a dark, dark day in American history.
Yeah, millions of people share your sentiments, Lou, and it's because it's based in fact. These things have happened, and there needs to be accountability. But I also think that, one of the things about the Capitol riot, as tragic as it is, as awful as it is that the story is going to evolve. And I suspect it's going to evolve like the Russia collusion story. Hopefully it won't take us 4 years, but we're seeing the changes in the narrative already. We now have a liberal activist who's been charged with participating. We now know there was plotting. We now know there was warnings. The big questions for me are, what did Nancy Pelosi know? When did she know?
Actually,
yeah.
No, I think you're right.
And Mitch McConnell, what did he know?
Absolutely. What did they all know? Because the rhinos and the leaders of the Republican Party are just as guilty as hell of working against this president and against the will of the American people. John, one quick question. Fiona Hill.
Sure.
Talk about very quickly, because we're using up a lot of time here, but she made a reference to you regarding the Russian collusion narrative in those so-called impeachment inquiry hearings. Your thoughts?
Listen, I don't hold it. She has a right to her own opinion about my reporting. I think my reporting has stood the test of time. Listen, she's the person. We're going to find this out tomorrow, or over the weekend. She's the person who introduces Christopher Steele to Subsource One. Who is Subsource One? The person that gave him all the bad Russian disinformation and who the FBI had under investigation since 2009. So Fiona Hill was hanging out with somebody the FBI thought was a Russian disinformation artist, and it would have been nice to have known that so she could be cross-examined when she was an impeachment witness. But once again, we're finding out far too late.
In other words, it's straightforwardly the testimony that we heard, not only from her, but many, if not most, of the other witnesses were outright lies and designed as disinformation against the American
certainly
people.
Omissions. There are a lot of omissions. I'm not sure I'd say lies, but I would say omissions for sure.
I'll say lies and omissions. John Solomon, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Up next, President Trump will soon release. Welcome back, and joining me now is Tom Fitton, president of Judicial Watch. And Tom, we are on the precipice of learning more about a scandal that has racked this nation for more than 4 years. The efforts of the left and deep state to overthrow a president, to block his agenda, to block his candidacy for that high office. Your reaction to the fact that they have succeeded, they being the deep state, the national left-wing media, the radical Dems, have succeeded in driving this fraud against the president and the American people successfully without consequence for more than 4 years, along with corrupt FBI, DOJ, and intelligence officials through it all.
It's been exceedingly frustrating that not only have they been able to do that, but they've been able to do it without the accountability that any other government official would have faced if the target was the politically correct target, meaning a Democrat or a leftist or a Republican establishment type. But because it was Donald Trump, the rules didn't apply to him. You could spy against him. You could. 4 years ago, this week or last week, Lou, Joe Biden and Obama were talking about spying on Trump, targeting his national security advisor. That was the transfer of power that happened 4 years ago.
Yeah, when you say it was all right, it's important for everyone to understand the predicate for that permission from the media and most, if not the majority of Americans who were watching this unfold in the early days. It was predicated on a serious charge that a president was effectively a Russian agent, that he was in collusion with Vladimir Putin. I mean, brazen, outrageous, fraudulent assertions by the leadership and the principal officials of the party. And there has been no consequence for them whatsoever for lying, for trying to destroy this man, his presidency, his administration. And now, as we are near Inauguration Day for Joe Biden, it is almost a welcome home, Joe, kind of atmosphere amongst the swamp creatures. How does this get made right, and can it be made right?
I don't know if it can be made right at this point, other than just trying to figure out what went on. And John Durham isn't going to prosecute any of these guys. We already know that. Biden not only is bringing some of these folks back responsible for these monstrous lies and misconduct, that he's actually giving them promotions. Biden himself obviously has gotten a promotion through this election process, which, as you know, I think was compromised. This president, he was the victim of monstrous lies, and when he tried to investigate what was behind it and how it happened, they tried to remove him from office for it. And for objecting to the election, daring to raise questions about the election, they're now trying to remove him from office.
Well, you're talking about now.
I mean, it's big lie after big lie after big lie with this crew.
Think of the sickening deception, hypocrisy, because what was the position of the radical Dems upon the surprise victory of Donald Trump in 2016? They said it was an illegitimate win. It was an illegal election. He was not legitimately the president of the United States. Hashtag resistance throughout. And doing so with greater animus and energy against this man and the Republican Party and Republicans, the deplorables, than anything we are witnessing now in response to what the Democratic Party has once again attempted, which is another impeachment on false grounds against this president. Without so much as a breath of opposition from the media.
Well, and not even much opposition from Republicans. These documents, they all knew it was a lie. It wasn't just Schiff who knew it was a lie. It was Rod Rosenstein who knew it was a lie. It was Barr who knew it was a lie. It's Durham who knew it was a lie. And they all sat on this. They sat on Biden material, his appointees. And we all know he wanted it released, but with the Trump administration, it's been day and day of casual sedition, trying to subvert his efforts for transparency on this corruption, subvert his efforts for accountability. They completely ignored him, and now it's the last minute, and we're getting documents a day late and a dollar short, reconfirming and further confirming the criminality behind the political class that sought to undo the 2016 election.
The effect of all of this is we are left with a government run by criminals, the corrupt, and those beyond consequence for their actions. That's where we are today. It's very likely to be the same place that we visit in the weeks and months ahead. Tom Fitton, good to have you with us. Thank you. Up next here, Kevin McCarthy, siding with a House rhino who voted to impeach the President of the United States. We take that up with Congressman Mo Brooks. Stay with us. There seems to be a little problem in the Republican Party, particularly in the House. Stay with us. The House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, is a man of many parts. And suddenly he is siding with the Republican Party establishment and the radical Dems that oppose everything he says he stands for. Now McCarthy says he doesn't back the effort to remove Congresswoman Liz Cheney as the House Republican Conference Chair. Cheney, to be clear, was one of 10 rhinos this week who voted to impeach the president. A member of leadership voting to impeach the President of the United States without evidence in very big trouble. You have corporations denying now that they will ever give the party because the president, they say, incited a riot, a mob on Capitol Hill and that assaulted the Capitol itself. They done that without evidence. In fact, evidence contrary to the statement. Your party is panicked, it seems to me, about that threat and maybe that reality that tens of millions of dollars are going to be denied the party that says it's all about working men and women and their families, the middle class in this country, small business. How does it square up for you, Congressman?
Well, this is what you would expect the socialists to do, is to stamp out any opposing viewpoints. Certainly, their reaction since November 3rd has been to suppress freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the right to petition your government just as best as they possibly can do. So I have great fears for my country.
I've got to ask you. Yeah, and Congressman, I've got to ask you now. Are you talking about the Sanders socialists, the AOC communists, whatever they want to call themselves? Or are you talking about the fascists in Silicon Valley who are denying free speech, who are anti-competitive and crushing competition? Or are you talking about Wall Street and corporate America? It's hard to tell what you're talking about, because arrayed against the American people right now are the most powerful entities in our society and in our economy.
And that's why I've never felt so much fear for the future of the United States of America. This is a revolution. Granted, it's been at the ballot box, but at the same time, it has been accomplished at a ballot box in which there is great suspect that there was massive voter fraud and other illegal casting of ballots. That's why I challenged the votes that were cast back on November the 3rd. Mm-hmm. I want honest and accurate elections.
Oh, Congressman.
The Democrats don't want that. And go ahead.
No, I was going to say, you can't say electoral fraud. This is America. You don't have the right to express your opinion. Or falling on your head will be Apple, Amazon, Facebook, Wall Street, the Chamber of Commerce, the Business Roundtable, National Association of Manufacturers. I mean, it's just not possible to actually say. I mean, do you really, really mean that?
No one said having a republic was easy. And the underpinning of a republic is honest and accurate elections. We have to fight for it. Unfortunately, the socialists have done an excellent job of exploiting every single weakness in our election system, certainly those that were identified by the Commission on Federal Election Reform, headed up by Democrat Jimmy Carter and James Baker back in 2005. They identified the weaknesses in our election system. They said we need to fix these things.
So
and instead of fixing these things, the Democrats exploited them, giving us what happened in November of 2020.
Let's assume I agree with you that the Democrats are scurrilous. Well, I think that every American should be, if not scared, deeply concerned, because as you're talking about socialists, I really can't tell the difference between corporate America, Silicon Valley, Wall Street, and the Sanders socialist and the president-elect's, what looks his projection of his administration and policies. This is a very difficult time. But when you say just socialists, I think we've got great things to fear from the Republican Party as well. You've got a House leader in the Republican Party who does not believe that a member of leadership should be removed, who votes with the Democrats against their own president without evidence, without due process of any kind. And that can only be an act of fear on the part of your leadership, whether it's Mitch McConnell, whether it's Kevin McCarthy.
Well, the chair of the GOP conference serves at the will of the GOP conference in the House of Representatives, and I'm sure that we will address that internally. We will find out where a majority of the votes are. But what's most important is to get all this behind us as fast as possible. We have to be strong, and we have to be united in the face of what we're going to face over the next 2 years with the socialist gains that they have made at the ballot box and the kind of oppressive conduct that they have shown they're going to engage in within the House floor, perhaps on the Senate floor, but certainly with the suppression of freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the right to petition your government, all of which are embodied in the First Amendment to the United States Constitution, none of which have been threatened as much as they're being threatened now from all different corners.
Congressman Mo Brooks. Much. You're a man of courage and principle. We appreciate your being here. Thank you. Up next, Twitter's Jack Dorsey says his ban of President Trump is just the beginning of big things. We take that up and more right after a quick break. I'll be talking with New York Post op-ed editor Sohrab Ahmari. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Well, breaking news tonight in a leaked video, a man who is quickly becoming one of the most reviled characters in America, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey, says social media giant's crackdown is a much bigger deal than a ban on President Trump. Well, that sounds like a clear and present threat against free speech in this country, against all of us, but in free speech, curtailing that right is, an assault on our Constitution and all the rest of us. Joining us tonight is New York Post opinion editor and columnist Sohrab Ahmari. Sohrab, good to have you with us. And your reaction to first that statement from Jack Dorsey.
Well, Lou, thanks for having me. I think the bigger than just the president's ban had already happened with what happened with the New York Post reporting on the Hunter Biden files before the election. We really were the test case now, it seems, in retrospect, because we had perfectly accurate reporting. No one contests any of the facts of it now. But we were censored by Twitter and Facebook, and we had our main @NYPost Twitter account suspended for several days on the basis of spurious charges that we had leaked hacked material. So I have no doubt that more censorship is coming because we've tasted it firsthand, and it's a bitter taste.
Well, it's a bitter taste. It is also a violation of constitutional rights. And Twitter is paying a price, but right now it's a bit at the margin because billions of dollars in market cap is hardly suitable punishment, sufficient punishment, in my opinion, for the egregious acts of Twitter, to the arrogance of that fool Dorsey to stand before the American people and say there's something bigger than shutting down, banning the President of the United States and denying the American people the voice of their elected leader. That's big enough for me, and it's big enough for me to think that Jack Dorsey is, well, he is lower than a snake's belly, and he has to be held accountable. Your thoughts?
I absolutely think so, and that, I think, requires a shift of mindset on the part of those of us who are of the right, people who are conservatives. For too long, we were beholden to these dogmas about strictly thinking about repression, about violation of fundamental rights as something that government does. We're now learning that overweening corporate power, the private tyranny of a few oligarchs, is also something that can threaten our fundamental rights. And yet there are still some conservatives who say, well, it's okay because it's a private actor doing it. Whereas, as you know, Lou, if free speech stands or falls in our country now, it happens on these platforms. So if they can ban the President of the United States, ban the nation's oldest daily newspaper, the New York Post, founded by Alexander Hamilton, then free speech is effectively dead, even if there's a letter in the Constitution. It becomes a paper right. It's no longer a living right. So we need to start to think away from these categories of public and private and just see what the real threats facing our historic rights are.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because public and private is an interesting expression, particularly when it's applied to corporate media. The fact is that in each instance, the public corporations are the owners of these news media outlets, whether it's Disney, whether it is Silicon Valley, Facebook, Twitter. There is a public accounting. Shareholders own those companies, and they're using money from those shareholders to donate to a preference on the part of management for which they should be held accountable. The idea that J.P. Morgan Chase decides which party it's going to donate to, why is it donating to any party? And we have to evaluate where we want shareholder money being spent by management. You know, we've reached a point in this country where there's this attitude that management of these public corporations is anything more than hired help. They are titans, they are oligarchs, and they are fabulously wealthy. But they do not have the right to crush our constitutional rights and those who would dare defy the monopolies, the oligopolies, and the oligarchs who run Silicon Valley and Wall Street. What do you think?
Well, in the case of Silicon Valley, which I think right now is the most acute threat to freedom of speech, has to do with a special carve-out that they have under a law passed in 1996, the Communications Decency Act, which was
230.
Enacted by, it was enacted by Congress before Facebook was a thing, before Twitter was a fact of our lives. And it didn't take account for the fact that these publishers would begin to, these platforms would begin to act like publishers. You know, if I were to libel,
but
yeah.
I'm sorry, but if I to interrupt, we're running out of time. I've just got to ask you this. We've just seen the Republican Party with an opportunity to eliminate Section 230 protections for Silicon Valley, for big tech. We've seen the Democrats say that they wanted to do the same. Neither party has the guts to stand up because, frankly, they own our Congress, they own our Senate, and they own both parties, do they not?
They do, for the most part, with a few honorable exceptions. And they also own, unfortunately, the think tank infrastructure that feeds ideas to the Republican Party. So many of them get money from Google, from Facebook, from Amazon to say that, no, there's nothing wrong with censorship as long as it's a private company doing it. But the American people, I think, are waking up, and those old talking points, I don't think, resonate as much when they've been purged en masse from these platforms.
Sohrab Ahmari, we hope you will come back soon. Enjoyed talking with you. And Sohrab has important things to say. Stay with us. Coming up next here, rhinos tell the president's base to repent for supporting President Trump. We take that up. Pastor Robert Jeffress with us. We'll be right back.